Sir, I need you to stand up right now.
I'm sorry, what's going on?
We have crying kids up there. What are you doing here?
My daughter goes to this school. I'm here for her ceremony.
You need to step outside with me now. You look suspicious.
Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You're a father. You've worked hard your entire life. You've dedicated yourself to protecting others, to serving your country, to making the world safer. And today is special. Today you get to watch your little girl celebrate moving up from kindergarten to first grade. It's a small thing maybe, but to you, it's everything. You've missed so many bedtimes because of work. So many school mornings. So many little moments that you can never get back. But not today. Today, you're here. You pressed your clothes last night, set your alarm early. You're carrying a small gift bag and your heart is full. You walk through those school doors with a smile on your face, ready to be the proud dad you've always wanted to be. And then, everything changes. Hold on, where are you watching from? Drop in the comment section. Tap like and subscribe, because this is where meaningful stories live. All right, let's jump in. This is the story of Marcus Henderson. And what happened to him on a bright May morning in 2021 will make you question everything you thought you knew about safety, about justice, and about what it means to simply exist in this world. Before we go any further, I need you to do something. If you've ever been wrongly accused of something you didn't do, if you've ever been judged before anyone even knew your name, if you've ever felt the sting of being treated like you don't belong in a place where you have every right to be, I need you to stay with me. Because this story, it's not just about Marcus Henderson. It might be about someone you know. It might even be about you. Marcus Henderson wasn't just any father walking into Riverside Elementary School that morning. He was a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. For 12 years, he had worn a badge that represented the highest level of law enforcement in this country. He'd put dangerous criminals behind bars. He'd worked on cases involving terrorism, organized crime, fraud. He'd taken an oath to protect American citizens. But none of that mattered when he walked through those doors. His daughter Maya was 6 years old. Bright eyes, beautiful smile, and a pink dress she'd picked out herself for this special day. She'd been talking about the ceremony for weeks. "Daddy, are you coming? Promise you'll be there?" And he promised, because that's what fathers do. The school had hired Officer David Morrison to handle security for the event. Morrison had been with the local police department for 7 years. It was supposed to be an easy job. Watch the doors, make sure unauthorized people stay out, help parents find the auditorium. Simple. Straightforward. Nothing complicated, but from the moment Marcus Henderson stepped into that building, Officer Morrison's eyes locked onto him. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? When you can sense their gaze even though you're not looking directly at them? Marcus felt it immediately. And when you work in federal law enforcement, you learn to trust that feeling. You develop instincts that most people never have to think about. He saw Morrison in his peripheral vision, always about 20 feet behind. Moving when Marcus moved, stopping when Marcus stopped. At first, Marcus tried to tell himself he was imagining it. Maybe the officer was just heading in the same direction. Maybe it was coincidence, but it wasn't. Other parents walked past, laughing, chatting, taking photos of their children's artwork on the walls. Teachers smiled and waved. The sound of kids laughing echoed through the hallways. It should have been joyful. It should have been warm. For Marcus Henderson, it was becoming a nightmare. He tried to ignore it. He didn't want to cause a scene. He didn't want to confront a fellow officer and create tension at his daughter's school. So he kept walking, found his seat in the auditorium, and waited for the ceremony to begin. But he could still feel those eyes on him, watching, judging, assuming. The ceremony started beautifully. The principal welcomed everyone. The kindergarten teachers brought out the children, all dressed up in their special outfits. And then Marcus saw her, Maya, his little girl. Her face lit up when she spotted him in the crowd. She waved with such excitement, such pure joy, that for just a moment, everything felt right in the world. Marcus waved back, his heart swelling with pride. But that moment, that perfect moment, it didn't last. About 15 minutes into the ceremony, two children near the back of the stage started crying. Now, if you've ever spent time around 6-year-olds, you know this isn't unusual. Kids that age cry for all kinds of reasons. Maybe they were overwhelmed by all the people watching. Maybe they were tired or hungry. Maybe they just needed a hug from their mom or dad. The teachers immediately moved to comfort them, kneeling down, speaking softly, doing what teachers do best. And that's when Officer Morrison looked at those crying children and then looked directly at Marcus Henderson. What happened next was captured entirely on Officer Morrison's body camera. Every single second, every word, every horrible, humiliating moment. Morrison moved through that auditorium like a man responding to an active threat. Not walking, moving with purpose, with urgency. Parents turned to stare as he brushed past them, and he was heading straight for Marcus Henderson. When Morrison reached Marcus's seat, he didn't ask questions. He didn't request identification. He didn't politely inquire about anything. He issued commands. Loud commands that everyone in that auditorium could hear. "Sir, I need you to stand up right now." Marcus looked up, confused. "I'm sorry, what's going on?" "Stand up. We have crying kids up there." "What are you doing here?" Can you imagine? Can you imagine sitting in an auditorium full of parents, watching your daughter on stage and suddenly being singled out like you're a criminal? Marcus stayed calm. Despite the shock, despite the confusion, he kept his voice steady. "My daughter goes to this school. I'm here for her ceremony. That's her right there in the pink dress." But Officer Morrison wasn't listening. His hand moved toward his weapon. His voice grew louder, more aggressive. "You need to step outside with me now. You look suspicious." Suspicious? That word hung in the air like poison. Marcus tried again. "Officer, I can show you my ID. I'm actually with the FBI. My daughter, Maya." "Keep your hands where I can see them." The body camera footage shows Marcus's face in this moment. And if you watch it, and millions of people have, you can see him processing an impossible situation. He's a federal agent. He's committed no crime. His daughter is watching. Dozens of other children are watching. And this officer has already made up his mind about who Marcus Henderson is, based on nothing but the color of his skin. Marcus knew what could happen if he made the wrong move. He knew that as a black man in America, any sudden gesture during a police encounter could be dangerous, could be deadly. So when Officer Morrison commanded him to get on the ground, right there in the middle of the auditorium, surrounded by parents and teachers and children, Marcus complied. A decorated federal agent, a man who had sworn an oath to protect and serve his country, a father who came to watch his little girl celebrate an achievement. He got down on the floor, face down, hands visible. While an officer stood over him like he was a dangerous criminal, parents pulled out their phones, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Some started recording. Others covered their children's eyes, trying to shield them from something no child should ever have to see. And Maya Henderson, 6-year-old Maya in her pink dress, on that stage. She started to cry, watching her hero, her daddy, being treated like a monster. Officer Morrison reached for his handcuffs. The situation was seconds away from getting even worse. That's when the school principal, Dr. Sarah Williams, came running into the auditorium. Someone had alerted her that something was very wrong. When she saw Morrison standing over a man on the ground, she hurried over. And then she recognized who that man was. "Stop!" Her voice cut through the tension. "That's Marcus Henderson. He has a daughter in this school. He's supposed to be here." There's a pause on the body camera footage. A long, uncomfortable pause as Officer Morrison processed this information. He had been so certain, so convinced he was stopping a dangerous individual. He was wrong. But the damage? The damage was already done. Marcus slowly got up from that floor. His clothes were wrinkled and dusty. His dignity had been stripped away in front of his daughter, her classmates, her teachers, and dozens of other families. Maya was still crying. Other children were upset, confused, scared by what they'd just witnessed. The joyful ceremony had become a trauma that none of them would ever forget. Officer Morrison didn't apologize. Not right away. He stepped back, but he offered no words of regret for what he'd just done. The ceremony didn't continue. Families began to leave. What was supposed to be a celebration had become something nobody wanted to remember. Marcus walked over to his daughter and held her as she cried. And in that moment, he had to do something no parent should ever have to do. He had to try to explain the unexplainable. How do you tell your 6-year-old daughter why a police officer treated her father like a criminal? How do you help her understand something that doesn't make sense? Something that shouldn't happen? Something that breaks the promise we make to children that the world is fair and just? In the days that followed, the story began to spread like wildfire. Parents who had been in that auditorium couldn't stop talking about what they'd witnessed. Some of the videos recorded on phones started circulating on social media. The local news picked it up, then the national news. People across the country were demanding answers. How could this happen? Why did Officer Morrison target Marcus Henderson? What made him so certain that a man sitting quietly watching his daughter was a threat? The police department launched an internal investigation. They reviewed the body camera footage frame by frame. They interviewed witnesses. They spoke to Officer Morrison about his decision-making that day. And what they found was deeply, deeply troubling. There was no evidence, none, that Marcus Henderson had done anything suspicious. He hadn't approached any children inappropriately. He hadn't made threats. He hadn't acted erratically. He had simply walked into a school building as a black man. And that alone had made Officer Morrison treat him as a suspect. The 2 children who had been crying, they were crying for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with Marcus Henderson. They didn't even know who he was. They were just having a moment that young children sometimes have. Overwhelmed, maybe missing their parents, maybe just tired. But Officer Morrison had looked at those crying children, looked at the black man sitting in the audience, and made an assumption based on nothing but prejudice. This is what racial profiling looks like. Not a policy written in a handbook. Not a law passed by politicians. But a split-second decision made by someone in power who sees a black person and assumes the worst. Officer Morrison didn't see a federal agent. He didn't see a proud father. He didn't see a man who had dedicated his career to serving his country. He saw a black man in a school, and in his mind, that equaled danger. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. Do you think Officer Morrison would have done the same thing if Marcus Henderson had been white? Really think about that question. Would a white father sitting in an auditorium have been followed from the moment he entered the building? Would he have been commanded to get on the ground because some children started crying? Would he have been treated like a criminal while doing nothing more than being a parent? The police department's investigation concluded that Officer Morrison had acted improperly. He had no probable cause to detain Marcus Henderson. He had no evidence of any crime being committed. He had allowed his own biases, his prejudices, to guide his actions, and in doing so, he had humiliated an innocent man and traumatized children at what should have been a happy, memorable event. Officer Morrison was fired from the police department. After 7 years on the force, his career in law enforcement ended because of what happened that day at Riverside Elementary School. The department issued a statement saying his actions did not reflect their values and that they were committed to serving all members of the community fairly and without discrimination. But for Marcus Henderson and his family, a statement and a termination weren't enough. Maya Henderson had nightmares. For weeks, she would wake up crying, reliving the moment she saw her father on that floor. She became anxious about going to school. She asked her parents questions that no 6-year-old should ever have to ask. Why did that policeman think Daddy was bad? Did Daddy do something wrong? Are police officers supposed to help people or hurt them? How do you answer those questions? How do you help your child understand a world where her father can be treated like a criminal just for existing? Marcus himself struggled with what had happened. As someone who worked in law enforcement, he understood the challenges officers face. He knew that difficult decisions sometimes have to be made in tense situations. But this wasn't a tense situation. This was a school ceremony. There was no emergency. There was no crime in progress. There was just a black father trying to be present for his daughter. The psychological impact of being publicly humiliated, of being treated as a criminal in front of your child, of having your dignity stripped away while doing nothing wrong. That kind of harm runs deep. It affects how you move through the world. It changes how you interact with systems that are supposed to protect you, but instead treat you as a threat. Marcus made a decision. He filed a lawsuit, not just for himself, but for every black parent who has been made to feel like they don't belong in spaces where they have every right to be. For every person who has been judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. For every child who has had to watch their parent be degraded because of prejudice and bias. The lawsuit sought $8.2 million in damages. Now, some people hear that number and think it's excessive, but let me break down what that number represents. It's not just about money. It never was. The lawsuit detailed every moment of what happened that day. It included the body camera footage, witness statements, and expert testimony about racial profiling and its effects. It painted a clear picture of a man whose civil rights were violated simply because he existed in a space while black. The lawsuit argued that Officer Morrison's actions were illegal, that they violated Marcus Henderson's Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable search and seizure, that they constituted assault and battery, that they caused severe emotional distress to both Marcus and his young daughter, that they represented a pattern of discriminatory policing that needed to be addressed through accountability and real consequences. Legal experts who reviewed the case said Marcus had a strong claim. The body camera footage alone was damning evidence. It showed clearly that Officer Morrison had no legitimate reason for his actions. The fact that Marcus was a federal agent actually strengthened the case in some ways because it demonstrated just how baseless the officer's suspicions were. If a person with 12 years of federal law enforcement experience could be treated this way, what chance did regular citizens have? The $8.2 million figure was calculated based on several factors: damages for the violation of civil rights, damages for emotional distress, potential punitive damages meant to punish wrongdoing and deter similar behavior in the future, and considerations for the lasting impact on the Henderson family's sense of safety and well-being. How do you put a price on dignity? How do you calculate the value of a father's reputation in his daughter's eyes? How do you measure the cost of teaching a 6-year-old that the world might not be a fair or just place? These questions don't have easy answers. But the legal system requires that harm be translated into monetary terms. The incident didn't just affect the Henderson family. It sent shockwaves through the entire community. Parents at Riverside Elementary School spoke out about how the incident had affected their children and their trust in law enforcement. One mother, Jennifer Martinez, whose daughter was in Maya's kindergarten class, spoke at a community meeting. Her daughter had trouble sleeping for weeks after watching what happened. She became afraid of police officers. She didn't understand why a man who was just sitting and watching, just like all the other parents, was forced to the ground. Another parent, Thomas Bennett, who had been sitting 3 rows behind Marcus, said he watched the entire thing unfold and couldn't believe what he was seeing. Marcus Henderson had done absolutely nothing to warrant that kind of response, he said. He was just sitting there, smiling at his daughter, being a proud parent. The only thing that made him different from the other parents in that room was the color of his skin. The body camera footage became a teaching tool. It was shown in training sessions about implicit bias and racial profiling. It was discussed in law enforcement classes as an example of how not to handle a situation. It was analyzed by psychologists and sociologists studying the impacts of discrimination. The incident became more than just one family's trauma. It became a case study in systemic racism. Experts who analyzed the footage pointed out several key moments that revealed Officer Morrison's bias. From the very beginning, when Marcus first entered the building, Morrison singled him out. There were dozens of parents entering the school that morning, but Morrison only followed one. There was no suspicious behavior to observe, no erratic movements, no attempts to hide or avoid detection. Just a man walking to his daughter's ceremony. When the children started crying, Officer Morrison immediately connected that normal childhood behavior to Marcus Henderson's presence, despite there being no logical connection between the two. The children were on stage far from where Marcus was seated. They couldn't even see him clearly from where they stood. Yet, in Morrison's mind, black man in building plus crying children equaled danger. That's textbook racial profiling. The footage also showed that Officer Morrison never gave Marcus a real chance to explain himself. He issued commands and expected immediate compliance. He didn't engage in dialogue. He didn't assess the situation calmly. He moved with aggression and certainty, convinced he was stopping a crime that wasn't happening. The case drew comparisons to other incidents of black people being treated as suspects while simply living their lives. Black people barbecuing in parks and having the police called on them. Black people swimming in community pools and being questioned about whether they belong there. Black people shopping in stores and being followed by security. Black people sitting in coffee shops and being arrested for trespassing. The pattern was clear and disturbing. Everyday activities that white people do without a second thought become potential police encounters when black people do them. What made Marcus Henderson's case particularly striking was his occupation. Here was a man who represented the pinnacle of law enforcement in America, an FBI agent with years of experience and a record of service to his country. He had clearance to handle classified information. He carried a weapon as part of his job. He had the authority to investigate federal crimes and arrest suspects. And still, when Officer Morrison looked at him, all he saw was a threat. If a federal agent could be treated this way, it sent a chilling message about how black people are viewed, regardless of their accomplishments or status. The lawsuit moved through the court system with intense public scrutiny. Depositions were taken. Witnesses recounted what they saw that day. Teachers described how the children reacted. Parents talked about their shock and disbelief. Principal Sarah Williams gave detailed testimony about the moment she realized what was happening and her rush to intervene. The deposition of Officer Morrison was particularly revealing. When asked to explain his reasoning for targeting Marcus Henderson, his answers were vague and circular. He said Marcus looked suspicious but couldn't articulate what made him suspicious. He said he was concerned about the crying children, but couldn't explain why he connected those children to Marcus. He said he was doing his job, but couldn't point to any specific behavior that warranted his response. Legal experts noted that Morrison's inability to provide clear, objective reasons for his actions actually strengthened Marcus's case. It demonstrated that the officer's response was based on subjective bias rather than legitimate security concerns. Evidence was submitted showing Marcus Henderson's exemplary record with the FBI. Commendations from superiors. Successful case closures. Years of service without incident. The contrast between who Marcus Henderson actually was and who Officer Morrison assumed him to be couldn't have been starker. This incident raised important questions about the screening and training of officers hired for school security. Should someone like Officer Morrison have been working in a school environment? Had there been previous signs that he held biases that could affect his judgment? What kind of training had he received about implicit bias and racial profiling? Were there safeguards in place to prevent this type of situation? And if so, why did they fail? An investigation into Officer Morrison's history revealed some concerning patterns. While there had been no formal complaints of racial discrimination filed against him before, there were informal concerns raised by community members. Some people in predominantly black neighborhoods said they felt he patrolled their areas more aggressively than he did in other parts of town. These concerns had never been formally investigated or addressed. Schools are supposed to be safe spaces for children and families. They're supposed to be places where everyone feels welcome and valued. When a parent can't attend their child's ceremony without being treated as a criminal suspect, something is fundamentally broken. Principal Sarah Williams later spoke about the impact the incident had on her school community. She said it shattered the trust that many families had in the school's ability to provide a welcoming environment for everyone. Black parents in particular expressed concerns about whether their presence at school events would be viewed with suspicion. Some said they now brought extra identification when they came to the school, just in case they were questioned. That they should have to do that, she said, was a tragedy. The story touched a nerve with Black parents across the country who shared their own experiences of being made to feel unwelcome or suspicious in their children's schools. Stories of being questioned by staff about whether they were really the parent. Stories of being watched closely by security while white parents moved freely. Stories of having their presence questioned and their motives doubted. Marcus Henderson's experience was extreme, but the underlying bias was familiar to far too many families. Social media became flooded with stories from Black parents using hashtags like #SarahParentingWhileBlack. A mother in one state shared how she was stopped by school security 3 times in 1 year and asked to prove she was her child's parent, despite dropping off and picking up her daughter every single day. A father in another state talked about being followed by a staff member when he went to have lunch with his son at school, as if he might be planning to do something wrong. The stories went on, painting a picture of a country where Black parents can't engage in normal parenting activities without facing suspicion. As the lawsuit progressed, it became clear that this case represented something larger than one incident in one school. It was about the everyday indignities that Black people face. It was about the exhausting reality of being viewed with suspicion in spaces where you have every right to be. It was about the ways that racism operates, not just through overt hate, but through assumptions, through bias, through the decision to see threat where there is none. Officer Morrison lost his job. Marcus Henderson filed a lawsuit seeking $8.2 million. These were the concrete outcomes. But the real impact of what happened that day in May 2021 can't be fully captured in employment decisions or legal filings. It lives in the memory of every person who was in that auditorium. It lives in the children who saw their classmate's father treated like a criminal. It lives in Maya Henderson's understanding of how the world works. And it lives in the ongoing struggle to build a society where people are judged by their actions rather than the color of their skin. The body camera footage remains a powerful piece of evidence, not just in the legal case, but in the broader conversation about racial justice. It's one thing to talk about racial profiling in abstract terms. It's another thing entirely to watch it happen in real time. To see a man doing nothing wrong be treated as a threat, to watch bias in action, to witness the humiliation and the trauma as it unfolds. The footage makes it impossible to deny what happened, or to explain it away. Civil rights organizations used the case to push for broader reforms in policing. They called for mandatory training on implicit bias for all officers. They demanded better accountability systems for officers who engaged in racial profiling. They pushed for community oversight of police departments to ensure that incidents like this were taken seriously and addressed properly. The Henderson case became a rallying point for these efforts. Some police departments around the country took notice and began reviewing their own policies and training programs. They didn't want to be the next department facing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit and the public relations nightmare that came with it. But resistance remained strong in many places. Police unions often pushed back against reforms, claiming they were unnecessary or that they undermined officer safety. Some departments made token changes while continuing business as usual. The fight for meaningful reform was far from over, but cases like Marcus Henderson's kept the pressure on. The lawsuit continues to move through the legal system. Whether it ends in a trial or a settlement remains to be seen. The police department had to weigh the costs of fighting the case versus the costs of settling it. They had to consider not just the financial implications, but the reputational damage of having this case play out in a public trial, where the body camera footage would be shown over and over again to a jury. Insurance companies that covered the police department got involved. They looked at the evidence and the strength of Marcus Henderson's claims. They calculated the potential costs if a jury awarded the full $8.2 million, or even more. They considered the legal fees that would pile up during a lengthy trial. They ran the numbers, and many of them didn't look good for the defense. For Marcus Henderson, the lawsuit was never just about money. It was about accountability. It was about making sure that what happened to him and his daughter didn't happen to others. It was about forcing institutions to confront their failures and make meaningful changes. Money couldn't erase the memory of lying on that auditorium floor. It couldn't take away Maya's nightmares, but it could send a message that actions have consequences and that civil rights violations will not be tolerated. Some people questioned whether any dollar amount could truly compensate for what the Henderson family experienced. How do you put a price on dignity? How do you calculate the value of a father's reputation in his daughter's eyes? How do you measure the cost of teaching a 6-year-old that the world might not be a fair or just place? These questions don't have easy answers, but the legal system requires that harm be translated into monetary terms. The $8.2 million was what Marcus Henderson's attorneys determined was appropriate given the severity of what occurred. It represented damages for civil rights violations, emotional distress, lasting psychological impact, and punitive measures to prevent future incidents. But beyond the numbers, beyond the legal arguments, beyond the courtroom battles, there's a family trying to heal. Marcus continues his work with the FBI. Despite what happened, he remains committed to law enforcement and to serving his country. But the experience changed him. It made him more aware of the contradictions he lives with as a black law enforcement officer. It reinforced the reality that his badge offers him no protection from the biases others hold. Maya is growing up now. She's older than 6. She's learning about the world in ways that children shouldn't have to. She's understanding that her father's experience wasn't unique, that it's part of a larger pattern, that the fight for justice and equality is ongoing. This story is still being written. The lawsuit moves forward. Communities continue to grapple with questions of bias and policing. Families like the Henderson family work to heal from trauma that should never have occurred, and somewhere right now, there are other black parents preparing to attend their children's school events, hoping they won't become the next headline, the next viral video, the next lawsuit, the next example of how simply existing while black can turn an ordinary moment into a life-changing ordeal. The fight for justice, dignity, and equal treatment under the law continues. And cases like this one remind us why that fight is so necessary. Every time someone sees the body camera footage from that day in May 2021, they're confronted with the reality of racial bias. Every time the story is shared, it creates an opportunity for conversation and change. Every time someone stands up and says, "This is not acceptable," we move one small step closer to a more just society. The $8.2 million lawsuit isn't just about compensating one family for the harm they suffered. It's about sending a message to every police department, every officer, and every person in a position of authority. That message is simple. Racial profiling is wrong, it's illegal, and it will be met with serious consequences. Until that message is heard loud and clear, cases like this will continue to happen. And families like the Henderson family will continue to pay the price for other people's prejudice and bias. So I ask you, what will you do with this story? Will you share it? Will you let it change how you see the world? Will you speak up when you witness injustice? Will you demand accountability from the systems that are supposed to protect us all equally? Because that's what Marcus Henderson did. He could have stayed silent. He could have tried to forget. He could have told himself that fighting back wouldn't change anything. But he didn't. He stood up. He demanded justice. He made sure his daughter would see that when something wrong happens, you don't just accept it. You fight for what's right. And that's the real lesson of the story. Not that the world is always fair. Not that justice is always swift. Not that change is easy. But that it's possible. That accountability matters. That dignity is worth fighting for. That one person's courage can spark a conversation that reaches millions. Marcus Henderson walked into a school to celebrate his daughter's achievement and walked out having experienced something no person should ever have to endure. But from that painful moment came a reckoning, a lawsuit, a national conversation, a push for change. Officer Morrison lost his job, But more importantly, police departments across the country took notice. Training programs were reevaluated, policies were examined, difficult conversations began. Is it enough? No, not yet. But it's something. It's a start. It's proof that when we shine a light on injustice, when we refuse to look away, when we demand better, things can change. So as we close this story, remember Maya Henderson in her pink dress, waving excitedly at her father. Remember Marcus Henderson getting down on that floor, maintaining his dignity even as it was being stripped away. Remember the body camera footage that captured every moment of prejudice in action. Remember the 8.2 million lawsuit that said, "This is not acceptable." And remember that this isn't just their story. It's a mirror reflecting back the society we live in, the work we still have to do, the changes we still need to make. The question isn't whether racism exists. The footage proves it does. The question isn't whether it causes real harm. The Henderson family's trauma proves it does. The question is, what are we going to do about it? That's the question that lingers. That's the question that matters. That's the question that each of us must answer, not with words, but with actions. Because somewhere today, another Black parent is walking into a school. Another child is watching. Another moment of joy is one wrong assumption away from becoming a nightmare. And until we change that reality, the fight continues. The story goes on, and we all have a role to play in how it ends. If this story touched you in any way, don't keep it to yourself. Like it, share it, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the soul. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.